He's programmed to replicate your daily routine. 9 hours in bed, 5 hours in front of the TV, 2 hours in the bathroom, whatever that's about.
Welcome, Gothamites, to another episode of the Arkham Sessions. My name is Brian Ward. With me, as always, the psychologist of the superheroes, superheroines, and super villains of Gotham City, and now the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Dr. Drea Letterman. Hello, Drea.
Hi, Brian. How are you?
Doing very well. It's a Friday. I'm looking forward to a nice weekend, and I get to watch Marvel movies for our listeners, so I don't really have any complaints. How about you?
Yeah, not a bad gig.
Yeah.
Not a bad way to spend an afternoon.
Even when you're watching a movie like AntMan and the Wasp, Drea?
Okay, look. AntMan and the Wasp. These are, yeah.
Hold that thought. We're going to get into that. Folks. Drea has thoughts or feelings at the very least about AntMan and the Wasp, or I think just the AntMan movies in general.
Yeah.
But first, I want to read a message that we received from one of our patrons, Scott the Therapist.
Yeah, I know Scott. All the therapists know each other. We all know each other.
Of course you do. He says, listening to the Infinity War episode, would a relationship between Wanda and Vision be explained by a trauma response by Wanda? She may well be looking for a new connection following her brother's death. The relationship could be originated from her grief and possible need for connection. What do you think, Drea?
Yeah, that's a really good point. We did scoff and minimize the quick buildup or lack of buildup for that relationship between Vision and Wanda.
Oh, 100%. I think Scott's got a great point. I'm not minimizing the relationship itself. I'm minimizing the fact that we didn't see. I'm minimizing the fact that it was minimized.
Yeah,
we never saw it happen.
It's
just
almost as
happened.
if there were scenes that were cut that involved their growing a bond together. And, Scott has a really good point too, because sometimes relationships can be accelerated or feel intense if the variables are right following personal loss. So It's not to say that it's not real or that it's temporary or fleeting. We'll learn later that, in fact, this relationship was incredibly personal. It was very important to Wanda and both to Vision as well.
You're also describing an entire little romantic subplot in Speed.
What?
You know the movie Speed?
No.
Keanu Reeves and
familiar.
Sandra Bullock. There's this whole thing about relationships that are spawned by traumatic events. They never work out. That's what they
say that in that movie?
Yeah, that's what they tell each other.
Well, there's something to say too about
and it turns out it's right, because then there's Speed 2 and
I can't speak to Speed, but adrenaline, there's a ton of studies around I think you would really be excited, Brian, about some of the studies around.
Well, that is what that's what adrenaline is.
No, some of the studies, they were called bridge studies, where they kind of spook people out and then pair them with attractive people. And
I remember. I've heard about these. Yeah, I've heard about these.
So there were some really wonderful studies that established a connection or a linkage between certain intense feelings and attraction. And I have not seen Speed. At least I've not recorded it in my memory bank.
I just remember that was a thing. I don't really remember it.
But that's very true. So any kind of intense and highly emotional, even a frightening situation. I imagine Speed is a movie that's full of
intense.
Yeah,
yeah. It's all about speed.
Wait, is this? Oh, wait. I'm thinking about Keanu Reeves on a speedboat. Is that Speed? Are you? Wait, he was not on a speedboat.
He
was on a cruise.
No, that's Speed 2.
I have seen
and
Speed.
Keanu's not even in that one.
I have seen Speed. They're on a bus.
Yes.
Yeah. I've seen it. I've seen it. I don't recall a lot of it.
And I'm telling you right now, having lived in Los Angeles for the last 20 years,
no bus is going that
ain't
fast.
no way you're going that fast.
True.
In LA. Ever.
Well, speaking of Speed, we've gone off course a little, but
Yeah.
there's a really, I think Scott has an excellent point, which is that there may have been some facilitators in the environment, in their social and physical environment, that may have impacted the way in which they got attracted to one another initially. I still hold. I still would want that story.
Yeah.
I still wish we had those scenes where they're comforting one another, and where I would imagine she would teach Vision how to be a little bit more human, and he would teach Wanda how to tolerate difficulties. I think that'd be a nice thing to see.
Oh, I agree 100%. And I feel like it would have earned every tear that I feel was ever shed for either of them in the rest of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I do find myself wondering, though, because Vision is not particularly emotional. I believe he has the ability to feel emotion. I believe that whatever he feels for Wanda is genuine, but you're talking about adrenaline and relationships founded on adrenaline and trauma responses and excitement and all of that generally don't sort of work out, the speed effect. But I don't think that applies to Vision. I think Vision's pretty stable. I think so is she potentially using Vision as some sort of surrogate? Like, would that, because she's clearly feeling more emotion at the beginning of their relationship. Like, it's probably more him comforting her. So is he sort of a comfort pillow surrogate kind of, like
I think
a blanket?
Sure, but I challenge you on why he has to be a surrogate. Why can't he simply be an original?
Well, the
form
surrogate
of
part
comfort?
comes basically from the fact that Scott says that she might be looking for a new connection following her brother's death. So
if you're saying he's a replacement or fulfilling the void of the brother, of the loss of the brother, I think it's much more complicated than that. And I know Scott is referring to this in a more complex way.
Yeah.
I don't agree that it's a surrogate, but I'd say,
look, I'm not a therapist. I don't have the therapist after my name or any of that. I don't have any letters after my name. So maybe I'm misusing the term, but
surrogate.
But for me, it'd be a proxy. It would be like, it's not even necessarily that it needed to be Vision. She found the connection. She used the connection. So it's almost like Wanda may have even been using Vision's, because I don't think Vision was having the same emotional trauma.
No, he had
like they didn't find each other. She sort of found him.
Right.
If it's true that she was sort of looking for another connection.
There were a lot of other fools around. Like, it's not as if, but like there are other people. It's not as if she was alone with him. I mean, there were times when she was alone. Right. I think what I'm saying is, like,
guarding her.
I would give it there's more than the mechanics you're describing. I think that
it would have been great to have seen all this happen.
It's not, yes, it's not a one-to-one replacement, or this idea that people or that women can't be alone with their difficult feelings. I think maybe what I'm saying is, we don't really know how this came about and how it blossomed. We have very little understanding of that, and we're only conjecturing.
Yeah.
My fantasy about this, honestly, is that he was...
This is your fanfic?
My fanfic on this is that they were equally comforting each other in some way, that they were equally connected and bonded authentically, not trying to... fulfill something that they were missing necessarily. But I think it's important to learn too that Wanda is in a young adulthood phase and is still learning about her powers, her identity, and her relationships. And I think there's the potential that Vision was also going through this maturity development
Sure.
and things like that. So,
I mean, he's technically like a toddler. So he's only been in existence for a couple of years. So
yeah, it's too bad that we don't have more in the film about them.
Yeah.
But I think what I'm agreeing with is the idea that she needed human bonding and comfort and validation, some sort of somebody to understand her in this time of recovery. And he, not even being human, seemed to have this ability to meet her there. And that, I think, is what makes them special. Like, that's something to say. That's profound.
would this be similar to when we said Black Widow also had those abilities to sort of be what you needed her to be and to meet you there emotionally?
Potentially.
When we were talking about...
I'd like to think that Vision is emotionally sophisticated, just as he is mechanically and intellectually sophisticated, that he's also built to have a profound emotional capacity. And I like this concept.
Yeah.
I like any concept of AI being emotionally intelligent. But that's a different podcast for a different evening.
Yeah.
And a different beverage
All right.
than the one I'm drinking.
Okay.
So I also got an email from Tim Flood, who had a lot to tell us about the Marvel Cinematic Universe, specifically some of the, not necessarily countering us, but filling in the gaps for us, because I think we did have some questions. I don't know the comics as well as you do, Brian, and I know that in the film things change, they adjust things. Tim's email had a lot to do with a variety of characters and their backstories and their relationships. I do want to ask you specifically about a couple things he mentioned. He's clarifying the Celestials. So there's a Celestial, capital C, Celestial, not capital C, like Ego, the father.
Oh, because Ego says in Guardians of the Galaxy 2 that he's what's known as a Celestial. That's what you mean? Oh, gotcha. And so, so he's... Okay, so I'm looking at his email. So he is suggesting that Celestials in the comics, lowercase c, are beings whose power levels scale beyond that of mortals. And then other similar beings include the Collector, the Grandmaster, and the personification of cosmic forces like Eternity and Infinity and Lady Death. The Celestials, capital C, are a race of such beings with power levels proportionally greater than other Celestials. Okay, so I'm not going to argue this point one way or another. I don't. When I read Marvel Comics, I spent less time with the cosmic comics. I just didn't find myself as interested in the stuff that took place in space as the stuff that was taking place on Earth. But I will say that I don't think it's an accident that Kevin Feige and company decided to put the word Celestial inside Ego's mouth in Guardians of the Galaxy 2.
Okay.
I think that Ego specifically said, "I'm what's known as a Celestial," and I don't think he meant lowercase c. I think he was giving away his sort of origin, which isn't true in the comics. Ego would have been one of the elders of the universe. By the way, so would the Collector and the Grandmaster. Both are elders of the universe. They are not one of the Celestials, capital C. And so, yes, he is trying. He is trying to make sort of a simple point about Ego just sort of slipping the word Celestial out of his mouth and not necessarily meaning the Celestials. I just don't think that's what happened here, because I think it's very possible that Feige and company didn't fully know how they were going to treat the Celestials going forward, and they sort of reinvented Ego as one. But then with Eternals, they did literally bring you the comics versions of the Celestials. And even with Guardians of the Galaxy, we see Nowhere, and Nowhere is one of the heads of one of the Celestials.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I'm not going to say that he's wrong. I just don't know that there's enough evidence here. And again, the word Celestial is so specific, and it's such a thing in Marvel that I don't think he just used the term and they didn't expect Marvel fans to pick up on it.
Right.
Right. Yeah. You said he had other questions?
The other point he had was, to which degree did Thanos recognize Tony Stark? And we talked about this briefly on the show, assuming that Thanos had some recognition of Tony Stark, but may not know who he is.
Yeah, because Tony shows up and Thanos says Stark, and Tony specifically says, "You know me," like, and yeah. So yeah, I do think that Thanos knew who Tony was. As I'm looking in this email, he explains that when Tony met Thanos didn't actually know Tony when they first met. He may have recognized the architectural elements of Tony's armor, if he had any visual sensors present when Tony blew up the control ship in the Avengers. But Thanos only knew Tony after using the Soul Stone. He says, I forget exactly at what point, but if you look at the gauntlet at the right moment, you'll see the Soul Stone light up. In that moment, Thanos, for lack of a better term, saw the sum of Tony's soul and knew everything about him and his character. He just didn't take that time when he encountered Steve. He was a little too busy at the moment.
Interesting. So the Soul Stone widens your psychic ability to see people's like full...
Oh, 100%.
Self? Okay.
I mean, the Soul Stone would, cosmically, you'd really be able to do anything when it comes to that sort of thing with the Soul Stone. But the only thing is, and listeners, if you've seen this, if you've heard this before and you've seen this moment, please let us know where this moment is. Tim actually says that he doesn't know exactly when it is, but there's only a couple of shots. Like Tony suddenly lands and then Thanos looks at him and you never see the gauntlet before he says instantly Stark. Mm-hmm. So I don't know when this moment is where the Soul Stone is used. I only know that in that moment, you've really got two, maybe three. I think it's a shot of Tony landing and then a shot of Thanos looking sort of up at him. The gauntlet might pass the screen, but certainly not enough to show you a glow on the Soul Stone. And then it's a sort of a medium close up on Thanos's face, or maybe I'm misremembering, but it's sort of, he just sort of says Stark. And there's sort of a smile, a little bit of a cocky smile on his face. Tim, if you can find that moment, I would love to see it, because I think that's a really great observation. And if any other listeners are aware of this fan theory that Thanos specifically used the Soul Stone, the stones themselves are kind of weird for me, and I think we talked about this a little bit in Infinity War. Is to me, like for instance, the Reality Stone.
Yeah.
Right. Why do you need the Time Stone to rewind
the timeline?
Wanda.
Oh, okay.
Destroying the Mind Stone in what's his name in Vision. Mm-hmm. If you have the Reality Stone.
My understanding is that the Reality Stone is more of an illusion.
Well, not really. I mean, the glove, the stones themselves genuinely alter. Like, it's not like the stones are altering a perception of the soul or a perception of time or whatever. Like these stones genuinely have the ability to do what they say, that like he could genuinely alter reality. The
So why
difference
doesn't
is
he just use the one stone to alter reality and eliminate 50% of the population?
because that's the thing is you need all of the stones in order to make a change that would affect the whole universe.
Okay.
So and so maybe the suggestion is, well, the creation of a stone would affect the entire universe, therefore you can't do it without all 6 stones. But
Yeah, scope, duration, frequency.
sure.
Well, so if you could have one of the stones, given your understanding of what they do, which stone would you want in your possession?
That's an interesting question. I might have to come back to you on that one.
Oh, interesting.
Well, now
Isn't that-
you're
I
getting me.
mean-
Now, I mean, you're a scientific person. I'm going to want to chart these out. I'm going to want to
wanna
weigh
sample-
some pros and cons.
sample them?
I'm going to want to weigh some pros and cons on each one. Which one would be better? My instinct would tell me that I want. I feel like the Reality Stone just gives you so many benefits. There's so many things you could do with the Reality Stone. Like, it seems to cover most of what the other stones cover.
My problem with the Reality Stone, and is it true that the Reality Stone alters or adjusts or actually transforms everyone's perception into the same thing? Like, it's not as if
It alters reality.
everybody's but
it
it's
genuinely
not just,
recreates.
It doesn't alter your reality. It alters
Reality.
everyone's period.
Correct.
Our shared reality.
Correct.
I think that would create madness. Like, you would just nothing would seem permanent and real. Like, due to the ability.
Well, it depends
to
on what
just
you're doing
shift
with it.
But then you render everything meaningless, which is what I mean. Which is what I'm saying. In the beginning, it might seem powerful and fun, and then you'd realize it's so fleeting because none of it's real.
Why do you say that? It's not that it's not real. It's
not real
He
in
has
that
the ability to
I think-
genuinely change reality.
But if you change reality with such with that level of power,
you're saying it's fluid.
it just becomes meaningless. You're just constantly knowing that you can change this to that and that to this until it's soup. Like, nothing really has a fixed concept.
Mm-hmm.
It just, everything can change.
Yeah.
And that's madness. Anyway, we've got to talk about ants.
And by the way, I'm fully cognizant for all of you who are currently yelling at your podcast app. I am fully cognizant of the fact that I keep saying reality is altering reality, but really what the Reality Stone does is it gives you the ability to alter matter. You can literally just do anything you want with matter, but everything in this known universe, except for antimatter, is matter. Gas, liquid, solid, it's all matter. So by altering anything I want, I can do anything I want, which I would think would include creating an Infinity Stone out of anything, molecules, or even just the shards of the Reality Stone that have just flown out of Vision's head. I should be able to do anything I want with the Reality Stone.
I'd want the time stone so that I can speed up this conversation.
About AntMan and the Wasp?
Well, I think the time stone would give me the most kind of groundedness in a way.
Yeah. Let's talk about AntMan and the Wasp, your favorite of the Marvel movies so far. Is that right?
No, I think they're fun. Look, and this movie does it more than the first one. The size changing, like the embiggening and shrinking, all of the gags and effects and stunts. That's the best part of this. They're so much fun.
Luis is the best part of these
Luis is
movies.
awesome. Yeah. So the amount of fun and just the humor, the visual effects, that's the best part of this. I don't care for the story. I think the characters are somewhat one-dimensional, and no matter what size they are. But I think this is a bigger part of the whole story that we've been following with Marvel, and there's some elements here that we have to pay attention to.
Oh, sure. This movie sets up Endgame. I mean, this movie is required. Some people would ask, why put this movie in between? You have to have this movie in order to have the key to Endgame. So, okay. Well, so this movie is post. Well, this movie technically is not post Infinity War. This movie sort of takes place pre-Infinity War or during Infinity War.
Yeah.
Scott Lang is under house arrest for 2 years. He's coming up on 3 days left of his house arrest.
And that's because he's violated
The Sokovia Accord.
The Accords.
Yeah. Which we had mentioned have no bearing in this world beyond Civil War. And I would argue they still don't. He's still being punished for something that happened during Civil War. So it's not like he's being punished for things that happen after it. As a result of this...
Well, can I say, though, the amount of chaos and destruction and threat to people's lives could actually warrant the Accords relevant again? Because this movie has a ton of small buildings being, exploding to be big, and Ant-Man the size of a whale wading into the ocean, and then
think about all
these problems,
all the infrastructure damage. When he becomes big and he's stepping on the ground, and and then there's the moment where he becomes big and he stops the truck and he's just destroying the street behind him as he's slowing it down. All of the structural damage to the city is costing taxpayers. I mean, this is a government need, right? This is a taxpayer need. I'm still in favor of the Sokovia Accords. This is what's required. This is what we're talking about, people. We're talking about not being allowed to just do whatever you want and destroy whatever buildings simply because of some sort of quantum lab.
And actually in this film, the story or the what's that? The MacGuffin.
Yeah, the MacGuffin. Yeah, so the lab.
The lab is the MacGuffin?
Yeah, it's the object everyone wants.
Yeah, maybe I'm not using that word right. The conceit, the plot is get mom.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, so, that's not the MacGuffin.
Yeah, so mom is in the quantum realm. She's been there. This is Hope Van Dyne's mom.
There's a hypothesis that she's been there.
Right, and she's been gone, missing, for 30 years. And this entire movie is to get Scott Lang, a.k.a. Ant-Man, to team up with Hope, aka Wasp, and retrieve, use all of this technology to retrieve mom from this phantom zone, this quantum zone.
I'm sorry,
place.
The phantom zone is DC.
I know, I can't say
this is the quantum realm.
The quantum realm. And I guess I'd argue that, one part of me says we have these superheroes with extraordinary abilities to embiggen, to shrink, to be the size of ants. They're doing amazing things. Let them be them. And yet I'm thinking they're not protecting the Earth from some bigger, global or interstellar threat. They're trying to save mom. And in the pathway, the means to do so, they're creating a lot of destruction and loss, potentially loss of life. I'd say this is kind of like these are some shenanigans.
They are, in fact, some shenanigans. So what you're saying is Hank and Hope being on the run from the Fuzz is it's like the FBI genuinely do need to catch them. Like they are causing shenanigans. Even though they weren't part of Sokovia, they got wrapped into the whole conspiracy angle of Sokovia. In other words, not necessarily, not that they genuinely conspired with Scott to give him the suit to go to Germany, but the fact that it was their suit, their technology, it made them accomplices to what he did in Sokovia. So he got them in trouble indirectly. But what you're saying is it might be justified because now they're just doing all kinds of stuff. Could we talk for a second about the logistics of some of these? I know you've got a real problem with the shrinking and embiggening.
This bothers me so much.
The lab, okay, so I'm willing, and I think you're going to go with me on this. The lab bothers me to no end. I'm willing to justify the fact that anything that is super important is probably bolted down to the ground, right? When it was built, anything in that building that was absolutely
oh my God.
crucial was bolted to the ground. But he shrinks it.
So can
pulls
we just
up the little handle like on the back of like in a piece of luggage,
right?
Tilts the entire building and rolls it. So now you're essentially talking about a seismic event. You're talking about a constant shaking of the building for however long he's rolling the building. And not only is it shaking, it's tilted severely to one side. So anything not bolted down is going to be flying all over the interior of this building, right? If you just picked up this building that we're in right now and tilted it to one side, everything would be tilted. Everything would be falling about, right?
I hate this so much. The concept of the building being shrunk down multiple times and passed around hand to hand, rolled like a suitcase.
I don't mind all that. I don't mind the passing around. There's something about gravity. Okay, so in some cases, I'm willing to concede that gravity would affect the things on the inside, similar to like water in a cup. And if you spin, the water doesn't go anywhere. I'm willing to concede that things can stay where they are if the building is moving in a certain way at a certain speed.
Okay.
But tilting it and rolling it, or carrying it and tossing it, or whatever. Like I just feel like the inside of that building looks like a mess.
This is a highly sophisticated technical lab. There's machinery, there's liquids, there's equipment, there's
ants. There are ants. There are ants all over the place.
There's beings. So there's already little ants. There's like real size ants that then when you shrink the building get shrunk even tinier.
Even tinier.
But
the ants are grown. No, well, see, that's the interesting thing. So, like, the ants are not real size ants. The ants are.
No, some of them are real size ants.
No. But the ants inside the building, for the most part, are grown. They're bigger because they're the ones building the interior of everything. Like, they're giant ants. And then when you shrink them again, they're not just the size of they're getting tinier.
I know we're not supposed to get hung up on this at all. In fact, they shrink the building so many times that I think the purpose of that becomes campy, like kind of becomes inverted a little bit. Like sometimes movies get overly sophisticated in their pseudoscience, overly decadent, almost excessive in the explanation and exposition of the science. It no longer becomes science. Does that make sense? Like it's just it's absurd.
Yeah, it makes sense. I don't feel like they explain it really at any point here, though. I think they just sort of, I think they look at the audience and go, sit back, enjoy your popcorn, have some fun, go with us on this. I don't think they're really trying too hard. I think they're just pushing buttons and shrinking and pushing buttons,
right,
and growing and I don't think there's really a whole lot of like actual attempts at the science, except the quantum stuff. The quantum stuff they're trying to explain.
There's a ton of explanation of the quantum stuff, but it does bother me. But I don't think we're meant to be too distracted.
No,
and in fact, I think we're meant to be humored by it.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Like it is sort of ridiculous at some point.
I do want to ask you this, though, since we're talking about ants for a second. I want to ask you about the ethical treatment of these ants. And it's not something I really thought about during the first movie, but there was a moment in the first movie where Scott asks how Hank is able to control them. And he says that he's using basically his hearing aid to send signals to the olfactory senses or something, blah, blah, blahs in their heads. Like this is some of the pseudoscience you're talking about. And he basically explains it away as saying, I speak to them. So are we meant to believe that he is merely requesting that they do these things and they're just doing them happily? Or are we meant to believe that they are basically under a form of mind control from Hank and Scott and Hope, anyone who's using, this technology to control the ants? Because we see that the ants are constantly being controlled to do anything they want. Oh, you want to break Hank and Hope out of prison? Thousands of ants are going to come in through the tunnels. They're going to bring miniaturized FBI clothes that are going to embiggen, And then at one point, Hope says that they have programmed an ant to go about Scott's daily routines so that the FBI don't question whether Scott has left his home because he's got an ankle bracelet on. So if they have programmed the ant, is it now doing something against its will? And if so, how is this different than what we've seen with, say, the Red Room or any other sort of mind control in the course of the MCU? Why do Hank and Scott and Hope get a freebie on this? Is it because the ants are adorable when they're big, or he can ride on them?
Remember, we did see in the film Black Widow, her adoptive mother, Helena. She had been programming pigs.
Pigs, yeah.
Yeah.
And we saw that they were doing it to the Black Widows themselves, because there was the one who ended up killing herself because she said, I don't want to, he's making me do this.
Well, I would say that ants are likely perceived as lower life forms.
I don't like that.
And it's fair. You're totally right to bring up this discomfort.
I would say that when it comes to the Red Room, he just based on the way he spoke about women, when he said that it's the I don't remember the exact line, but he implied that women were the world's most underused resource, or he basically looked at them as commodities. Like, I can just take these women and do what I want and control them, and I will then control the world.
What does that have to do with ants?
He saw them as lower life forms to a degree, the way Hank sees ants, and the way that we, the audience, see ants as lower life forms.
But ants are different than humans.
Sure.
And
wow, you're now justifying the
really,
ants being treated with. I just don't know. I just don't know if they're happily doing it.
I agree with you, but I'm believing that they are. It's interesting because insects in this film and in the other Ant-Man film are portrayed as intelligent in some way. They actually can be compatible and collaborative with human beings.
Yeah.
They can kind of do the same things we do, just on a different scale.
Yeah.
And the ability to program them requires that amount of capacity. And yet,
I mean, Hank literally has them building the quantum tunnel.
No, they're scientists. They're they're lab technicians. They're in their PhD programs. But interestingly, at the same time, they are being misused. Do they have free will? Can they crawl away? What do they get in return? Are there rewards? I don't know.
Just a question I had.
I appreciate your discomfort, and my discomfort around insects makes me not really be available to answer this question.
All right. Okay, so what else? I guess we should actually just talk about the people in the movie, right?
Yeah,
Since those are the beings that you're most capable of analyzing.
Not a lot of change with the folks who we already know, but there is a newly introduced kind of villain, kind of villain turned anti-hero.
A victim.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say anti-hero. I would simply say ultimately she's a victim. She's a victim of circumstance, being in the wrong place at the wrong time. You're talking, of course, about Ghost. You're talking about Eva Starr, the daughter of Hank's former colleague who was unceremoniously let go and decided to continue his quantum research on his own. And at some point in time, everything went awry and exploded. And Ava was hit by all of this quantum stuff. And now she phases in and out of existence. And she's basically dying. And her villainy, for lack of a better term, is simply a girl who wants to go on living. And she is living every second of her life. And because we don't know how the quantum stuff is affecting her, every second could be like 3 or 4 seconds to like normal people. Or it could be minutes. It could be hours. We don't know. She is in constant pain. And so she just wants all of this to end. It's basically driving her crazy.
Yeah, there's something about the disequilibrium in her body. It's the quantum energy or the displacement of energy. And when we see her, she is phasing in and out of like herself and in her environment. So her body is flickering or fading or phasing. There's just a constant movement, and that disequilibrium and lack of balance creates psychache for her, emotional pain. But as I understand it, also some kind of physiological pain. She's essentially in torture. This is torturing her.
Yeah.
So she goes to any lengths to try and get out of this torture.
Now, what's interesting about her is it's a complex character, because on one hand, you would think that someone who is in such constant torment may want it to end, just may want to die. They may be like, how much longer do I have? And then when you find out that, well, you could have weeks, she'd be like, oh, that could not come fast enough. Like some people...
Would have been a truly dark writing of the script.
Yes.
And I agree with you. Like the reality of this is living for as long as she has. I mean, she's a young adult. The accident happened when she was probably... I don't know. They didn't say like 12 or 13.
Well, we saw a flashback, and she was a young girl. She was probably 10-ish.
So all of her adolescence into teenhood, into young adulthood, she's had this identity crisis and this physical pain. And she's detached from humanity. She has this caregiver who is, here we go, like potentially a surrogate father. He's supported her. He's helped her create this little quarantine space, or this little
it's like a residence chamber sort of thing. Like it helps like sort of solidify, bring her.
It's like regulating system. It allows her to kind of recover for short periods of time.
This character, Bill Foster, by the way, who is heavily implied to have been Goliath from the comics, and played by Lawrence Fishburne.
Yeah. I thought that she was an interesting... It's sort of like this is the darker side of the technology, the elements, all of these scientific advancements have repercussions. They have casualties, and she's a survivor of that. And she kind of has to tolerate this pretty painful existence. But she pursues a solution, and she sets Bill to pursue a solution.
Yeah.
And it turns out that it's Hope's mother who could have the healing factor. This kind of gets weird for me because this doesn't really get explained well.
It does.
Do you think it does?
Well, it gets explained in that, yeah, it does. There's a moment. In fact, I have the audio here. I'll play it for you. And this is again one of those moments where they basically try to explain the science by simply brushing it away. So here you go. Let's take a listen.
But that energy from your hands, how did you do that?
I'm not the same woman I was 30 years ago, Henry. This place, it changes you. I mean, adaptation is part of it, but some of it is evolution.
So she is now saying that she has evolved with this quantum energy and now has this ability to sort of heal the quantum flux within Eva. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't appear to be permanent. Like, this isn't a thing that it's almost like she has the ability to absorb this energy and then release it, because then at the end of the movie, they send Scott back to get more. And they go back into the quantum realm.
Right.
And his job is to fill up the tank that could be used as medicine, essentially, for Eva. So I'm not even sure Ava's healed by the end of the movie. She is just simply relieved at the end of the movie. Yeah. And they have to continue to go back to the quantum realm to bring back more of this stuff so that she can then use it on Ava.
And I think there's something to say about Ava in her quote, condition, that she's representing somebody who has experienced a significant trauma. And, on display is this very visceral concept that she's, again, flickering and fading and she's phasing. Visually, it's really disorienting. Mm-hmm. And so, you imagine, so here's the connection to trauma. If we think about somebody who's still in recovery from a horrible, life-changing loss, which she did experience, as a young girl, literally watching her family be killed by this disastrous event. Mm-hmm. So she's, still in this kind of like post-traumatic phase. And I think on screen, I felt a certain amount of discomfort watching her, right? Like she's so, for one, just watching any image toggle back and forth like that. Like there's mm-hmm. something about that it's unstable. Our eyes can't handle that well.
Plus she looks sickly anyway.
I mean, there's makeups and there's facial expressions and she's in anguish. So you have this anguished expression, and then you have this kind of visual effect that makes you feel disoriented and uncomfortable. And I think how it lands on us, or how it sits with us, is like, we don't want to be around that. We want that to end. We can't really tolerate that. Mm-hmm. And there's a real manifestation of someone who's that traumatized that may present that way, like not literally shaking or moving in that way, but psychically having this instability, unable to be regulated, maybe emotionally intense. And frankly, whenever we experience a trauma, we're doing this kind of cognitive neurobiological recovery, and she's kind of still she has deficits there, but I think her flickering and phasing also represents that instability, the difficulty forming coherent thoughts, the difficulty in placing that trauma in memory in a meaningful way, the forgetfulness, the memory problems, the intensity of emotions that makes people react in certain ways, sometimes very, very emotional, sometimes the opposite, kind of numbing and depersonalized and avoidant. And all of that kind of creates this sense of disorganization in the mind. And let me be clear that manifests in a number of different ways. But I think that her like character and the way that we have this unstable energy in her can represent somebody who's yet to recover from a trauma and is just, trying to live with and tolerate and overcome the constant noise. It's not letting them find peace and rest and calm. And I may be reading a lot into it, but I think that that's something that can be, maybe respected about this.
Sure. Would you say that it's much different than, say, terminal cancers that are literally slowly eating you from the inside, that you suddenly lose function, you can't necessarily control everything about your body, you're constantly in pain. It's someone who is basically waiting to die in many regards. And when I was watching her, because of how sick she looked, I was constantly getting this sort of, this is something that is literally sort of eating her quantumly, cosmically, whatever. Like this is just something that is, and mentally she would have to deal with this, but the constant pain and torment that she is in, and the way that her body is literally breaking down, and the way that Bill tells her she might have weeks left to live, this seemed to me to be like a very serious sort of cancer.
I mean, your analog is more of a direct connection to a medical condition, which I could see that. Yeah, I could see that too.
Yeah.
And let me also, because you kind of spoke to this, but let me say that some people experience so much anguish and psychic and emotional pain that they do feel as if their mind is deteriorating. They do feel as if they are not themselves, and they do think about dying. And so I appreciate your other comparison, like maybe the literal connection here is this is someone with a medical condition, and I'm not saying that it has to be one or the other.
No, for sure.
But people with mental health conditions also,
or people with like CTE.
Yeah, I mean,
where it's a genuine brain trauma that now gives them constant torment, constant pain, to the point that sometimes a number of athletes have literally suicided because they can't get the pain to stop. And so you almost get that same anguish out of what she's going through. Like, she doesn't want to be a villain. She just doesn't want to be going through all this suffering anymore. And Bill doesn't want to be a villain. He just wants to save her, and he feels like he's promised it to her. And so he's doing everything he can to help her as well. But I want to ask, once she feels that relief, at the end, Janet puts her hands against the temples of her head, and she appears to relieve Ava of this pain. What then happens to her mentally? I mean, if you're talking about someone who is, you mentioned it as being noise, just a constant noise, almost tinnitus of what happens when suddenly that noise is gone? Mentally, what does that do to you? Does that mean you could then work toward recovery? Is that a completely different torment in a way, where it's like, if all you've ever known for years and years and years of your life is this noise, and now it's suddenly deafeningly silent? what does that mean when she is relieved of this pain?
I do think that most of her initial experiences are relief and comfort.
Sure.
And you know, when I said noise, I really was referring to this concept of being dysregulated.
Oh, yeah.
Not being able to soothe oneself, not being able to find stability.
Yes.
And balance in the mind. And of course in the body in this case. It's really fascinating too when if we stick with this metaphor, this connection to mental health conditions, that getting better or finding relief sometimes can feel so different for a person. It's unfamiliar. They don't really recognize themselves. Mm-hmm. They might have been used to a certain way of thinking, a certain type of core schema, a certain way to relate to the world. In this case, this intense pain becomes nothing, becomes relieved. And there might be a reaction there, a reaction to self-inflict pain in order to feel something familiar, of confusion about how to relate to oneself or how to understand one's identity and relate to others. New way to look at the world, to not see oneself as an outsider or different. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that is a journey. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of development there and this is kind of why it's weird. I should have been applauding this part, but I didn't really like Michelle Pfeiffer just like healing this young girl by touching her temples and then being like, here, your pain's gone. I've been in this tiny little quantum realm for 30 years. Let me save you. Yeah. I don't know. Weird kind of saviorism happening there. But
well, and what kind of, I mean, we'll talk about that in a second. That's interesting.
It's so look, if we really get into psychology here, she's mom. She's Hope's mom, right? Yeah. And this little girl lost her parents. Mm-hmm. This could very much be establishing. So on screen, there's the physical healing gesture, mm-hmm. touching her temples for like 2 seconds. But
they were glowy. They were glowy fingers.
And then suddenly Ava's cured.
Yeah. Well, this whole movie, okay. So, all right. Well, now that we're getting down into we're breaking down the psychology of this, this movie is also very much about fathers and daughters, right? It's about Hank and Hope, and it's about Bill and Ava. And you know, Bill has sort of become her father figure to some degree, but is unable to help her. And Hank has been unable to help Hope. And
I mean, when I think about this movie, I think about the tremendous amount of personal, individual isolation, separation. Mm-hmm. You have Janet, who's been in solitary confinement for like 30 years. You have Scott Lang, who's been on house arrest for 2 years and being very limited. He's kind of contained there. Yeah. You have this young girl having to live her life mostly in this little chamber. A huge part of this film carries those components of deprivation and strained relationships. This movie is about social pain. Mm-hmm. Social pain is the distress we feel when we're deprived from others, when we're excluded, when we're rejected, when we're separated. And whether that's prison or the quantum realm or quarantine, it's that like loss of agency, loss of control, loss of connection to others. Mm-hmm. In many ways, the being trapped. I can't imagine Janet's recovery. She seems to kind of be weird, but she bounces back. If anyone, she's the one who's going to be very decompensated. She's mm-hmm. been in this little realm for 30 years.
And that means something else entirely to her, because time and space and everything moves completely differently in the quantum realm.
Does that mean she feels that she's been there longer?
I would imagine so. I would imagine that she's been there like both for infinity and for 2 minutes and for like, if you're talking about the phasing in and out
Right.
of Eva.
Yeah, this person should be even more disturbed.
Well, and that's sort of, I mean, you saw she's got this like post-apocalyptic, she's clearly fighting something down there because the wings that she had as Wasp, she now appears to have sort of as like blades on her back. Like she, you know, when she is seen, she's wearing a cloak with a hood and a mask, and one of the blades is sort of sharpened and coming out the side, like almost like a sword or spear sort of thing. So there's some,
like what went on? What happened to her in there?
wouldn't it be great to have a series on?
Is there going to be
on the 30 years of that Janet Van Dyne was stuck in the quantum
They'd have to
realm?
do a lot of de-aging technology on those visual effects.
But that's also what's weird is we learn that like time and space mean really nothing there. But this sort of weirded me out a little because, okay, fine. If time and space mean nothing there, does she stay young for the 30 years or does she age at an even higher, clip than say someone out in the real world? But no, she seems to be pretty on par with, she's pretty on par with her husband. Like they look at each other and she's pretty much aged physically the exact same as Hank. Just spent 30 years in a quantum realm where
she
literally
wouldn't be this okay. Like that
yeah.
amount of social isolation and deprivation, let alone the other types of sensory deprivations. Like I just cannot imagine that she'd even be able to connect, use language, manage emotions. I know that it's a Marvel movie and they've got to accelerate any kind of
not just accelerate, like just
difficulty with that. But
yeah, just wash away any difficulty.
Yeah,
with
just
that.
kind of like
because
gloss
he even says, "I'm so sorry. The last 30 years, if I had known," and she was like, "It's okay. You're here now." like she's instantly okay with it.
There are a lot of studies that show that people in solitary confinement, even for much shorter amounts of time, just months, right, lead to premature death, mental health conditions.
Yeah.
The amount of mood changes. It's very, very. It's like a natural.
Is Janet
state
primed to
in.
become like a villain in the Marvel universe? Like, is she just acting okay, but really deep down she is completely disconnected from everyone she is currently talking to? That's what's weird is at the end of the movie, they're just the three of them are happy family, just working on
really
science
odd.
together, just working on some stuff. It is weird. What does happen though? I mean, like, so there are real life examples of these sorts of things. You know, people who have been in isolation, maybe someone who was trapped on an island somewhere and brought home. You know, I think of Castaway. Not that was a real life thing, but you know, I think of what then happens. Like, what is the protocol and the treatment for someone who has spent 30 years in complete isolation?
There actually is a man who was in solitary confinement for almost 30 years. Like he may reach 30 years in prison in solitary confinement.
I thought that was like illegal, that sort of thing.
Well, and you're right. It is bringing up legal issues around whether this is considered cruel and unusual punishment. And this is a case that is gaining a lot of attention because this man, Dennis Wayne Hope, who was originally imprisoned in the 90s, like he had committed a series of armed robberies. He had actually escaped arrest. Like he was pretty guile in his ability to manage this system to get out, but he later was arrested again. I'm not even sure why robbery and resisting arrest and escaping arrest leads to solitary confinement. But
Unless you're like the Birdman of Alcatraz, who just, has to be put into a place that cannot be escaped.
It's really kind of fascinating that this was the end point for him. As of today, and this is, by the way, this is covered by the podcast The Daily just a couple days ago. As of today, he's still in solitary confinement. He's been there 27 years.
Wow.
And just to get a sense of what this is like for him, he is in a cell that is 9 feet long and 6 feet wide. This is considered smaller than a compact parking space. He says he's able to step 2 or 3 steps to reach the cell entrance or door, and that's about as far as he can really kind of move around in there. It is incredibly, as he describes it, just so limiting. He just stares at walls. He doesn't have access to people. He gets to leave the room 1 hour a day to exercise, to move his body in another cage, like just in a fenced in area, without anyone there. He's not talking to people. He's not able to connect with anybody.
But surely there's been like connection with guards who unlock his door and take him to wherever, right? Like it's not like he's spent 27 years without interacting with single human being.
There's got to be some,
like someone brings him his food.
There's got to be some interaction, but he is taking his case to the Supreme Court, given the amount of deprivation he's experienced. And the folks that are describing this for people, who have interviewed him say, and so there's also a little bit of social connection too, given his case. He's like he's now a little bit more exposed to social connection. He says that his brain works very differently, that he can't connect words together, that he can't even remember certain words, that he's experienced a significant amount of deficits and losses related to his functioning around thinking and memory. And this makes a lot of sense when you think about the synapses in the brain and the different networks and what we need around us in order to continue to keep those building blocks thriving. It's all been atrophied. So surprisingly, experts say he's doing much better than they expected him to do, but he is not well. And he himself has said this existence has often led him to wonder why he's even alive. What is the point of this? It weighs heavy on him. And it's, interestingly, his case, the motivation to pursue legal action and to get the appropriate justice that keeps him waking up in the morning and feeling motivated to do just about anything. And the reason more psychologists and lawyers and others are watching this is that it could really be processed at the level of the Supreme Court. It's reached that level already, and at this recording, they're determining whether they'll see this case. And if it does count as cruel and unusual punishment, by the way, unusual in that Texas, which is where this is happening, is the state that does this the most, and other states would rarely have somebody in solitary confinement for this long. The recommendations actually are that any kind of solitary confinement in the context of prison happens between 1 to 2 weeks, and someone then is reintegrated back into kind of the normal population because of the way that inmates are showing these long-standing effects. Some inmates will be very reactive to normal sounds and things. Like there's
overreactive?
No, there's like cases where like even the sounds of plumbing, it's like opening, a window, everyday sounds would freak them out.
Yeah.
Would be unfamiliar to them. They would lose the familiarity with everyday things, and they would be highly anxious.
That's interesting, because you would think, You would think that like that's all they heard was the plumbing for however long. Like you would think that they would be, overly adjusted to that sort of, you would think if it was a human voice, that would freak them out because they haven't heard that.
That too.
But yeah.
But it's not like you're in a retreat, you're not, you're not exposed to all of the stimulation and the luxuries of an environment that's very enriching. And that's why I don't understand what Janet was in. But if we're really comparing it to solitary confinement, it is the deprivation of stimulation and connection and social impact.
Yeah.
And so it's incredibly frowned upon because it has these long-lasting consequences on the brain, on the physical brain. So again, I think that she would be completely different. She wouldn't be. I would even wonder if she would truly recognize her family.
Yeah. It makes you wonder if she had not, if they hadn't waited until the last 10 minutes of the movie to introduce her, if we would have seen any of this. But instead, because she's only introduced in the last 10 minutes, you're like, well, we got to wrap this up real quick. Everybody's happy.
Yeah.
Whereas it would have been more interesting if she had been the villain throughout the movie because of all of this. Now, you don't want to villainize her necessarily because you don't want to be like, she's a victim, but now she's crazed. You don't want that, but it would be interesting to have this character that is like not the person that they thought they were getting.
I think it's a tough space to be in, because if you end up writing her as weakened and vulnerable and disoriented and what is it in a frenzy, or kind of like you know what I'm getting at, like I think that would get a lot of criticism.
If suddenly she's Nell.
Who's Nell?
Jodie Foster, like if suddenly she's just sort of this wild child in the middle of the woods, it's just kind of...
Actually, that might be more realistic, but...
Well, sure, but you don't want to write it that way.
No.
You don't want to...
Yeah, that's...
Because then you're like, oh, now you're mistreating this scientist character that... But genuinely 30 years in a world that... Like McDonald's wouldn't even look normal to her at this point. She would, you would think she'd be so stimulated by everything around her visually, because nothing looks the same as the last 30 years she's experienced in the glowy world of the quantum realm. Mm-hmm. Everything is just different.
I would assume that maybe she would benefit from Doctor Strange being her counselor.
Oh, wouldn't that be great?
Because he knows this. He knows this stuff.
That's a movie I want to see. That's a TV series. That's a 6-episode TV series I want to watch. Doctor Strange and Janet Van Dyne.
Therapy.
Just going through some therapy. Now, he's not a therapist. He shouldn't be, let's not give him jobs he shouldn't.
He's a doctor. He's
a surgeon. He's a neuro, like nerves. He does nerves surgery.
Yeah.
But let's not have him outside his lane. But he does know a thing or two about quantum realm, and so and mirror universes and all that stuff.
Yeah, I think
I'd
more
love to see that.
more like a mentor.
Yeah.
Someone who can guide and just help her, assist her in getting integrated back into this world.
Yeah.
But what does it matter? Because by the end of this movie, they turn to ash because the blip.
Yeah, all three of them, which, by the way, still lends a little bit of credence to my thought that he specifically chose certain people, because all three of the quantum realm scientists disappeared. Like,
I don't think he cares. You're talking about Thanos?
Yeah.
I don't think Thanos cares.
Because she says, don't get stuck in any of the time vortexes because we'll never get you out. And spoiler alert, the time vortex is exactly what's used to win Endgame. But all three of the quantum scientists get blipped away. So don't know. I think there might be a little something to him selecting at least certain people. Anyway, all right. So needless to say, you had issues with this movie, but it does sound like there's a lot there that, at least spawned the thought of real life science. The unfortunate thing is Janet didn't come back uncomfortably awkward, but it at least made you say, hey, look, she would have been really messed up.
Yeah.
And we got to talk a little bit about Eva, which is good. And I don't think she's a villain. I think this is another one of those examples that you were talking about earlier of characters coming up that seem to have sort of a purpose, and they're not just black hats. They are people with causes. And all right. So, Drea, why don't you tell the folks where they can find you online?
You can find me on my website, drdreapsychology.com, and on social media at the account at Arkham Asylum Doc.
You can find me online. I'm at Twitter at bward028. You can find me on Instagram at b_ward028. You can find us both on Twitter at Arkham Sessions and on Instagram at the Arkham Sessions. You can email us at arkhamsessions@gmail.com. You can follow us on Patreon, where you can get a shout out. We're going to do that now for folks who have helped make this episode possible. You've got Michael Pruitt, Weffy, Eric O'Sullivan, Rachel Acevedo Hoffman, Zach Neal, Zachary Hunter, Mike Blanchard, Dr. Girlfriend, Maria Diego, Nick Gilbert, my father, Carl Ward, Dr. Jerome Anderson, John Henry, Antonio Lopez, Jay Griffin Hughes, Todd Stashwick, Scott the Therapist, Frank Moeller, Mark Pepper, and Swara Salih. Thank you all so much for your contributions. You too can have your name called out on the next episode of the Arkham Sessions by going to Patreon and joining the $5 tier. That gets you your name called out. Plus, there are all kinds of other benefits. I am about to upload a video of me basically building some Lego. And it might be Batman related, and it might be Batman 1989 related. Maybe. Okay, it is. Join Patreon to check that out. Until next time, I'm Brian Ward.
I'm Dr. Drea Letamendi.
And together we are
The Arkham Sessions.
Do you guys just put the word quantum in front of everything?